All right, welcome to Berkshire Playwrights Lab. I'm James Anthony Tyler, one of the co-artistic directors, and we are here for Keeping Theater Alive. I have my other co-artistic directors with me, Joe Kakachi, Felicia Harden, and Rick Dresser. And hey, Joe, why don't you get some words?
So, Keeping Theater Alive came into being because Dan Lauria, who you all know from our stages as well as Broadway, playing Lombardi, as well as the Wonder Years, as well as 1,000 other things, was really concerned about keeping theater alive in these very difficult times of COVID-19 and everything else. And so he reached out to a lot of his actor friends and asked them a very simple question. Would you write something and then perform it at home, record yourself? I've got an editor, Jeremy Fletcher, and we'll put it together and do a series of these essentially monologues. And that's what they did. He's got 52 actors who have now participated in this. You're going to see 6 of them tonight. We're doing this in conjunction with Long Branch Theater, with New Jersey Rep in Long Branch, New Jersey, with Durango Play Festival in Colorado, Seven Angels in Waterbury, and the Laguna Playhouse. And it's our way of giving you something, because we haven't been able to do live performances this summer, as you are painfully aware of. But tonight, you get the first of a series of these that we're going to roll out and see something new from Berkshire Playwrights Lab. Felicia?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we have been keeping theater alive for BPL was that we created an online talk show called Off the Cuff. And this show, we worked with the show with Berkshire Museum, but the show really looked at, it took a deep dive into societal and cultural issues that impact theater goers and theater makers. And on the show, we had all types of people from theater. We had theater writers, theater producers, artistic directors, and actors. Our shows consisted of people like Wendell Pierce, Lillias White, Dan Lauria, Tony Shalhoub, just to name a few. And by the way, if you missed any of those shows, you can actually go to our website, BerkshirePlaywrightsLab.org, and check out any of the old shows.
Thanks, Felicia. And I got to say, I'm honored to be here with my fellow co-artistic directors. I just want to talk a little bit about what BPL actually does. We started 13 years ago with a mission of developing new plays. We've been at it ever since. Every summer, you've been out to see these workshops of these plays. And what you have provided us, in addition to financial support, is the one essential element in developing a new play, which is the audience. The audience tells us everything. And thanks to you, some really terrific plays have come out of BPL. And as playwrights, we know that there just aren't enough opportunities like this around the country. So we've hit the reset button this summer because we had to. As Felicia said, we did this new series Off the Cuff. We're hoping to do some more of them. But also we're developing a pretty bold new plan for next summer. It continues our mission, but it takes it further. So stay tuned for developments on that. But we will be back with your help. James?
I love that you use that word essential, Rick, because I just feel like the arts for my life personally, they are essential. Like really gotten me through some dark times and made me laugh and made me think and made me feel. And I know many of you watching this video feel the same way. You've come to the theater and been moved. And I say all that to like ease into my pitch to get money out of you. We need money to survive and do the work that is essential in our field. And so, I have been really, really blessed to be associated with the Berkshire Playwrights Lab since 2015, when I workshopped my first play there, Some Old Black Man. And we want to give back to other artists, make space for other artists to do the same, other playwrights, other actors. And unfortunately, we cannot do that without money. So please, if you have $1, $2, $25, $2,500, whatever you can give, we would greatly appreciate it to keep our company and the arts going. So thank you for watching. And Joe, you want to close this out?
I'll close this out by going back to the beginning and saying we want to keep theater alive, and we want to start at Berkshire Playwrights Lab. And now I get to say the 3 words I used to say from the stage and haven't uttered in a year and a half. Enjoy the show.
Hi, I'm Jodi Long. I wrote a one-person show called Surfing DNA, and today I'm going to read an excerpt from it. In the schoolyard as a child, there was a joke I was often told. Chinese eyes, eyes slanted one way. Japanese eyes, eyes slanted the other way. What happens when a Chinese person marries a Japanese person? They have a baby that looks like this, eyes slanted in opposite directions. Growing up in Queens, New York, kids ran away from me screaming with laughter. I was silent. The fact was, I really was Chinese and Japanese. I never told anyone because I didn't want them to think I was supposed to have 2 eyes that were different. I mean, it was bad enough being Chinky or Jap, but both? Other kids were just one thing: Italian, Irish, Greek, or Jewish. Visions of children in the schoolyard taunting me with their eyes like this plagued me to be silent. The truth was, my parents really did have different kind of eyes. My mother has small almond, no epicanthian fold to her Japanese eyes. My father, being Chinese, has larger eyes with an epicanthian fold. My eyes are like my father's. I was secretly happy about that, for my father's eyes were more like everyone else's eyes, meaning everyone else who wasn't Asian. Still, I was always wary that this playground joke would prove itself true. Daily, I would stand at the bathroom mirror and breathe a sigh of relief to see 2 epicanthian folds sitting atop my Asian-looking eyes. My parents were vaudevillians. They met at the China Doll nightclub in New York City. My mother, a showgirl. My father, a tap dancer. After they married, my father created their own variety act, Larry and Trudy Leong. They played the nightclubs in and around the tri-state area. They played the Chop Suey circuit, Asian-themed nightclubs in San Francisco that catered to a glamorous Asian and non-Asian crowd, the Asian-American version of the Borscht Belt. They played the Palace, my father exchanging tap routines with Sammy Davis Jr. And one time, they even played the Ed Sullivan Show.
And now from China.
My mother was 5 months pregnant before she realized I was the reason she was bursting the seams of her costume. 9 months in the womb, bobbing around to my parents, singing, dancing, telling jokes. It was a wonder I didn't come out doing a soft shoe. My first recollection are of my mother's long hair piled high on top of her head in a huge bun. My father's tuxedo bow tie dangling by my face as he carried me home from the nightclubs half asleep. The smell of grease paint and the flutter of false eyelashes as my mother kissed me goodnight, tucking me in. The rustle and swish of taffeta as she exited the room. Oh, how beautiful she looked in the sequin gowns she made for herself. On her one evening off when I was asleep, she would sew and bead long into the night, and in the morning a new gown would magically appear on her personal form-fitted mannequin. Layers and layers of tulle netting under taffeta, diadems of bugle beads dripping dewdrops of light, sequins shimmering on gowns that years later my mother ended up throwing out. Thrown out. like all the kimonos my mother's family threw out when they could only take what they could carry, when they were shipped off to American internment camps during World War II, even though they were American citizens. Thrown out. Where are all those kimonos? The white and gold one my mother graduated Portland High School in, the one my grandmother made, the gowns my mother sewed, the purple, the green one, the black net lace one with pink mauve taffeta underneath. Where are they now? I see kimonos in antique stores and fantasize they are my mother's. I see Ginger Rogers-style dresses and wonder, where are my mother's? The fabric of my life, sewn by the women of my life, thrown away. If I could only find them now.
Thank you so much for supporting regional theater all over this country. Oh my gosh, we're waiting to get back to see you, and I'm sure you're waiting to get back to see us. But until then, we really appreciate your support, because in my mind, theater is essential.
This is dedicated to my father, James, an ode to meat. Cleveland, Ohio. It was the mid-50s through the mid-60s, and my city was one of the industrial and manufacturing hubs of the Midwest. We had those great sports teams, the Indians, the Browns, Euclid Beach Amusement Park with that wonderful saltwater taffy, barbecue ribs from Whitmore's barbecue joint in the summertime, swimming in Fairfax public pool, or roller skating at the Playmore roller rink, and fishing along the Ohio shoreline of Lake Erie up in Port Clinton. We'd catch yellow perch, walleye, black bass, and crappie. Cleveland. That was a great place to grow up. The best location in the nation, they called it. Now, this was long before the late night talk show hosts dubbed our town the Mistake on the Lake. See, our city was besieged with lost jobs, a mass exodus, the Cuyahoga River, which actually caught on fire, and a malignant lack of leadership in local government. It was a pattern that repeated itself in Rust Belt cities like Detroit, Michigan, and Gary, Indiana, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Youngstown, Ohio, Buffalo, New York, and other cities along the Great Lakes during the 1970s. Our building at 1477 East 92nd Street had 8 units, 2 large buildings with 4 apartments to each. They were connected by a basement that had storage lockers, hot water tanks, and a common boiler room which supplied the apartments with heat in the winter. We lived in apartment number 8. It was huge. It had a foyer, a generous living room, a stylish dining room, a full eat-in kitchen, and 3 substantial bedrooms. I shared my home with my younger brother Marlon, who we called Spanky, my younger sister Marie, who we dubbed Dolly, my incredible and beautiful mother Ruby, and my father, James, a good-looking tall man with a Mississippi smooth elegance and grace about him. He worked as a machine operator for Republic Steel during a time when it was the country's 3rd largest steel producer. James' southern roots ran deep, and that included his love of the outdoors, fishing, hunting, and even gardening. And he instilled the same passion in our lives at a very early age. My dad celebrated his country upbringing often, and his down-home ingenuity was never more apparent than the day he announced, "Hey boys, I went down to Central Market and bought this meat." $50 could get you a lot of meat in the 1960s. We had a lot of red meat. My father told us he wanted to cure his own meat the way his father did back home in Mississippi. But there was one issue. My dad didn't have access to a smokehouse in our working class neighborhood. So James decided he was going to experiment. He was going to take the ribs and the pork chops and the salt pork and smoke them in our building's boiler room. So my dad made his way down to the basement with his two sons in tow. And with deliberate and methodical precision, he laid those cuts of meat across the cloth-wrapped steam pipes that sprouted out from this huge furnace like some bizarre octopus. We left the meat in the basement to cure, and my father kept an eye on this curing process for several days. Oh, did I mention this all took place during one of Cleveland's legendary winters? So one evening, as my family gathered around the black and white TV to watch Gunsmoke, which was my father's favorite Western, we could hear the whistling of our radiators as the steam weaved its way through those iron coils. Then, the not-so-subtle aroma of steaming, cooking pork products began to waft through our apartment. "I smell something cooking, Daddy," I announced. My father slowly looked up from his TV program and took a sniff. His eyes grew to be as big as saucers, filled with the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. My dad jumped up from his favorite chair and let out a "Lord have mercy, my meat," as he took off at a full gallop down the stairs to the basement. We looked at one another, my brother, sister, mother, and I, and nodded to each other. We shrugged our collective shoulders and, without saying a word, acknowledged that, well, that's Daddy. Needless to say, we ate a lot of chicken that winter. Thank you, James and Ruby. I'll miss you all the days of my life. This is just intermission, folks. So with your support, live theater will be back real soon. Thank you.
On August 7th, 1988, the Chicago Cubs played their very first night game at Wrigley Field, being the last ballpark to install lighting. Being an avid Cub fan and the New York Times knowing that was true, they asked me if I would write the op-ed page for that day's edition of the New York Times to commemorate that historic event. This is the result of that request. And on the seventh day, the Lord rested and came to beautiful Wrigley Field to watch the Chicago Cubs play his own game on his own green grass under his own lights. This is the first line uttered by a character I created in the play Bleacher Bums more than 10 years ago. To a true Cub fan, all the tangible symbols of devotion, the ivy-covered wall, brick houses, hey, hey, Ernie Banks, Harry Carey's rendition of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and all the rest were always joined by that one intangible, the lack of lights. Well, scratch the intangible. I haven't as yet had the displeasure of seeing what Wrigley with lights looks like. They say they've been designed to go with the decor of the park. Maybe they'll let the ivy grow up the framework and curl delicately around each zillion kilowatt bulb. Probably not. I do know it has been a long, tough battle. On frequent trips back to Chicago, I'd see the yellow signs in the windows of the homes around the ballpark declaring, "No lights in Wrigley." I understood their concern. Wrigley Field was the friendly giant. This colossus would swallow up thousands of people on balmy afternoons, and it seemed you could hear the reverberating roar from miles away. The streets round the park would teem with kids with mitts, hoping to grab an out-of-the-park homer, and neighboring rooftops would fill up with lawn chairs for a true bird's-eye view of that day's event. But come sundown, a strange thing happened. Sunset was the time for all good people to go home to their families and loved ones, and as the neighborhood shops shuttered up for the evening, so did Wrigley. Other teams had rainouts, only the Cubs had darkouts. The Cub philosophy was simple. Baseball was a game of grass and sunlight. Friendly giants sleep at night, but come morning you could be sure that the darkened hulk that loomed over you in Chicago's near north side would awaken once again to welcome the multitudes coming to pay homage. They say P.K. Wrigley dropped a little of his gum money during the off-season of 1941 and actually bought lights. In December of that year, however, Pearl Harbor created a new priority, and P.K. quietly donated the lights to the war effort. He probably also felt he could take a hint. Day games did create unique problems, though. If you wanted to see a Cub game early in the season or after Labor Day, and it happened to be a weekday, and you happened to be a student, there was only one way to do it. A lot of forged "Johnny was sick today" letters made their way to Chicagoland teachers during the ball season. At most parks, fans screamed and waved when the TV cameras panned them. Only at Wrigley would you see school kids and businessmen alike ducking from the camera's view so as not to be discovered on the late-night sports report by eagle-eyed principals and bosses. Friday was Ladies' Day. Once you reached puberty, Friday at Wrigley was paradise. Hordes of halter tops and bikinis coming more to tan and wave at cute outfielders than get involved in a ball game. But if you were teenaged, boy, who cared? I suppose it will never be quite like that again. So now, after all the hoopla, after all the passionate feelings on both sides of the lights in the Wrigley Field controversy, what does it all mean? In the sober light of day, sunlight, that is, I guess I'm left with the unoriginal feeling that ultimately the inevitable does happen. In the fantasy minds of baseball fans, we love to think of our memories of men and deeds of the diamond as the stuff epic poems are made of. The reality is often something else. I remember when I first went to the Cubs locker room as a young man of 30, there to do research on the play. At last, face to face, I'd meet my heroes, gods who walked the earth, prodigious behemoths of countless battles on countless ball fields, who would throw their massive arms round my shoulders and say, "Son, welcome to Major League Baseball." What actually happened was I met a room full of guys, mostly younger than I was, with more in common with college kids than the grizzled veterans I imagined. The final blow, they called me Mr. Mantegna. My Cubs, the mythical men on the baseball cards, had frozen in time in my mind only. Roger Kahn was right. They are the boys of summer. And when the boys become men too old to play a boy's game, new boys take their place. So what does this all have to do with lights at Wrigley? Just this. I'll remember the Wrigley of the sunlight, fondly. Just like my dad remembered the Wrigley Field with the wooden fences, or my grandfather remembered the one with no fences. Maybe that's why we have change. So we have something to lock away in a secret part of our memory to be divulged at a later date to our children and grandchildren. From this day on, no baby born will know Wrigley totally without lights. But for that matter, no baby born will ever gaze at a moon that's been unwalked on by man. Things change. Things change. Times change. Some for the better, some not. An era is over, a page has been turned. Will the lights in Wrigley have much impact on the world in general? Of course not. Will it even help the Cubs become a more competitive team? Probably not. But one thing will happen. I and countless others will sit in the bleachers some summer night with our own pint-sized fans, and amidst their protests will bore them with the statement, "I remember when..." I started this with jumbled Genesis. I'll end with it. Let there be light. What kind of light is not what's important. What's important is, let there be baseball. Hi, Joe Mantegna here, thanking you for your donation which helps support local and regional theaters around the country. Thanks again.
This is from a collection of poems called Blue Goddess Love Poems, A Journey to Self-Awakening that I wrote in 2016. The poem is called The Soul's Edge. When I am gone and all that is left of me is ashes and dust, let the ocean waves take me to far off warm, heavenly distant shores. Let me float to the clearest aqua blue holy waters that have been blessed by the angels and ancestors. Let me land on the clear blue diamonds at the soul's edge. Scatter me among the wild flowers that bloom, glorious purples, blues that make you weep, humming yellows that sing bright songs, majestic pinks, and revolutionary scarlet reds, shouting of God's grace and glory, his heavenly, amazing artwork in this field of perfect paradise. Toss me, let my ashes lift to the warm winds high in the celestial summer periwinkle sky. Better yet at sunset, when it turns orange golden and the mountain's peak meets the azure horizon. When I am dust and gray, let all that still is be even more alive in this universe, because I have lived and loved most flawed, yet perfectly. Look for me in all that delights you, my love, and we will never die. Our love is immortal, living in the air, still breathing, pulsating in all that we ever looked upon and loved. Our energy is still vibrating in the heartbeat of the universe. Only our flesh will fall away to dust, to ash, to gray. All that really matters returns home to God. So take this to the soul's edge. We always leave some beauty behind for those who we've loved and touched so tender, deep, and true. No act of kindness is ever wasted in God's world. It sprinkles as raindrops. It ripples as morning dew. Like bright sunshine spreads seeds melting into the atmosphere. We leave our signatures, our imprint in the wind, floating on clouds, shouting, I have been here, and I did my very best. So when I am gone, blow my ashes into the starlight black blue sky with diamonds glowing bright and a hazy golden moon hung by God's thread, connecting us infinitely, lighting up a blaze in the nighttime sky. Look up, my love, and know that I am always with you. And let my soul's light fly. Hi, I'm Kim Brockington. I just want to thank all you wonderful supporters of theater out there for keeping theater alive and well. And just know that we'll be back, better than ever. So stay safe, stay strong, and stay well. Thank you. Sincerely.
Hi. This is from a journal I kept through the years 2003 to 2004 when I was working in New York. The theatre had become an occasional employer rather than the mainstay of my living. As I got older, I began to think that theatre was probably a young person's game. I was far keener to say yes to a few weeks on location than to a theatre run, but if the theatre's where you started, it's always where you return. Theatre actors are a very specific tribe. The work conditions for a start discourage any illusions you might have about seeking an easy option. The first illusion you're cured of is that a theatre actor's day begins at the half-hour call before curtain time. The truth is, From the moment you lift your head off the pillow, your every breath is tuned to that precious, scary, frustrating and mystifying eighth of the day that constitutes the why and wherefore of your entire life. And you will in all likelihood spend it in a drafty, dusty building, filled, if you're lucky, with hundreds of complete strangers judging your every move, your every inflection, and either liking you or more likely dismissing months of your hard work with less than a thought in their heads. And as a result, you live in a permanent state of loving and resenting it all at once. When I talk about it like this, I begin to wonder why I do it. But the truth is, I haven't mentioned the magic, the part that can't be explained. It's why, as soon as we begin to talk of it, we run the risk of sounding rather precious and boring. Perhaps that's why we constantly make jokes about our work. We're forever bemoaning our fate, complaining about how dreadful a performance was, or how bad the play was, or about the other actors we had to endure. It saves us the bother of trying to talk about the magic that cannot easily be expressed. But between actors, it's a shared code, an understanding. Just as I was beginning to wonder if my theatrical life was destined for the back seat, my manager called and explained that the Nederlander organisation wanted to gauge my interest in a production of Fiddler on the Roof. I was excited. I was nervous. I was terribly excited. And then there was no communication for nearly 2 months. In fact, I'd begun to assume the idea was dead. And this was reinforced by the knowledge that the Nederlanders had gone to the trouble to listen to the soundtracks of 2 musicals I'd done in London, both of them over 20 years before. Now, I know my voice was not good on those recordings. The sound was untrained, undisciplined. My only ace was that I sang in tune, most of the time. The recordings were not the best calling cards in the world, and yet it tweaked the curiosity of someone in New York. And on the 5th of August, I met with the organisation on the 10th floor of the Roundabout Theatre's rehearsal rooms on 45th Street. I knew these rooms. During my last gig on Broadway, I'd been involved in a workshop production of a musical called Dear World by Jerry Herman. It had an impressive cast: Audra McDonald, Deborah Monk, Madeline Kahn, Chita Rivera, among others. We spent a week together, remounting the show with 2 pianos and a few music stands. It was one of the happiest working weeks of my entire life. Memories of that week began to flood my mind as I stood in that rehearsal room, and I had time to indulge them as I'd arrived over an hour early. I could hear music coming from above and below where I stood. Upstairs, Gypsy was in the middle of a casting session, and below me, the road tour production of Gondoliers was rehearsing. I soaked it up, and as I gazed over the rooftops beyond the dusty window panes, I remembered a time in my life when a moment like this would have seemed unattainable.
I think I might be sick mentally. I have issues. Well, okay, not issues. I have one issue. I have an issue with goodbyes. I don't mean the kind where you naturally come to the end of a visit or a dinner or a long flight or relationship. No, truth be told, I love those kinds of goodbyes because the words are always immediately followed by an actual departing, a perfectly satisfying, instantaneous separation. It's clean, it's done, it's final, it's inevitable, it's understood, it's over. You turn away, you walk away, you drive away, you roll away, you go away. You move on. And best of all, you get back to your self. See? It's the other kind of signing off See, it's that dreaded telephone goodbye that sets me on edge, causing my lower jaw to slowly, painfully slide forward and jut out into a hideously aggressive, malevolently contorted, yet almost cute underbite. So I asked myself, what the hell happened? Terminating calls never used to be a problem, right? Back in the day, when the phone was an infinitely smaller part of my life. I mean, before the damn thing was literally fused to my hand, dominating my field of vision and relentlessly assaulting my bleary, blurry, bloodshot eyeballs. Because I sort of nearly remember having had thousands of calls that smoothly wrapped up with a simple, okay, gotta go. Yep, bye. Click. But somehow, somewhere along the way, it all gradually shifted. Now it seems to take for friggin' ever to get off. And so I find myself having to just abruptly hang up on, well, everyone. Am I a bad person? Why are people suddenly incapable of finishing calls? Is it insecurity? Mass insecurity? Or some kind of collective loneliness? Because I'm not lonely. I don't feel insecure. I do feel confused, anxious, impatient. See, now when I toss out, okay, gotta go, or even just bye, instead of the deeply desired ciao or later, or my favorite, go, a volley ensues. I'm met with, so everybody's good over there? Or you got plans for the weekend? Or, ooh, boy, you sound kind of tired. Or even worse, well, okay then, I'll check in with you tomorrow and we'll go over the blah-de-blah. Or worst of all, talk later, which has the implicit questioning inflection, forcing me to respond, which then triggers their response, which again demands another okie dokie from me, which then reminds them of a joke or online article or childhood memory or statutory rape case they saw a fucking 4-hour documentary about. And all I'm looking for here is goodbye, click. God damn it. Doesn't anyone read social cues anymore? Don't answer that. Just hang up. Hi, this is Tony Shalhoub. Just want to thank all you good people for supporting live theater. We'll be back.